And the reaction to the assassination of Charlie Kirk was, as you might expect, pretty tone deaf. There was no self-reflection. Now, we don't know who the assassin is. He's still on the loose. The FBI abruptly canceled a press conference where they were going to give us updates, citing fast changing developments. So hopefully there'll be some news soon. So we don't know. We don't know what his motive was. But I don't think it's unreasonable to suspect that his motive had to do with Charlie Kirk's politics, his conservatism, his position on issues with whom this assassin very likely disagrees. Now, when I say tone deaf, listening to things that were said on CNN, MSNBC, it's as if the hostile, toxic, tense political rhetoric is both sides. You know, Republicans do it, Democrats do it, and we all ought to rethink the way we talk to each other. We've talked about this now ever since Donald Trump went down the escalator, about all the friends we used to have. We no longer have. The tension we now have at the workplace. Relatives who don't even talk to each other because of our support for Donald Trump, because of our belief in America first. How many of us have lost friends as opposed to us cutting off other people? When I see a poll, as I did a few years ago, where 61% of Democrats consider Republicans racist / sexist / bigoted, twice as many as Republicans feel that way about Democrats, there's a problem. When, as we discussed before, the study done of the hundreds of freshman students at Dartmouth, and they asked the ones who were self-described as liberal versus the ones who were self-described as conservatives, would you agree to have a conservative as a roommate if you're a liberal? And if you're a conservative, would you agree to have a liberal for a roommate? The conservatives overwhelmingly said, I don't care. The liberals overwhelmingly said, absolutely not. There's a problem. When the primary source for most people's news are still the major nightly news programs, ABC, NBC, CBS, and according to Media Research Center, 92% of the news coverage of Donald Trump is negative. Both Trump 1.0 and Trump 2.0, there is a problem. When 85% of black people consider Donald Trump a racist, there is a problem. Now, Elizabeth Warren, the senator, said something very interesting yesterday. Here's what she said, number 10.
Oh, please. Right. Why don't you start with the President of the United States? Right? And every ugly meme he has posted and every ugly word.
Let's start with the President of the United States. Let's do that. President Joe Biden referred to the followers of Donald Trump as believers in semi-fascism. Let's start at the top. Kamala Harris, when she was running for president, in an interview with Anderson Cooper, who point blank asked her whether she thought Donald Trump was a fascist, and she said, yes. Let's start with Joe Biden. Joe Biden claimed he wasn't going to run for president in 2020. The reason he decided to do it was because of what Donald Trump said after Charlottesville. And in Biden's first campaign ad, he cited Charlottesville and said that's when Donald Trump, the president, uttered the words that shocked the world. There were very fine people on both sides, implying that Donald Trump meant that there were very fine Nazis on both sides. Even Jake Tapper, 2 years after the fact, on CNN said Donald Trump was referring to the debate about whether or not there should be a Confederate monument in the public square, and that there are good people on both sides of that debate. Yet people who hate Donald Trump still cite that as one of the reasons they hate this man. There is a problem. There is a problem when people routinely on CNN, routinely on MSNBC, refer to this man as a fascist, as a racist, as a Hitler, as a tyrant, as a Nazi. But last night, Matthew Dowd, one of their commentators, made a very insensitive, if not hateful, comment about Charlie Kirk, and today they fired him. Number 4.
We don't know any of the full details of this. That we don't know if this was a supporter shooting their gun off in celebration, or so we have no idea about this. But following up on what was just said, he's been one of the most divisive, especially divisive younger figures in this, who is constantly sort of pushing this sort of hate speech or sort of aimed at certain groups. And I always go back to hateful thoughts lead to hateful words, which then lead to hateful actions. And I think that's the environment we're in, that people just, you can't stop with these sort of awful thoughts you have and then saying these awful words and not expect awful actions to take place.
Matt.
And that's the unfortunate environment we're in.
So he has been fired for what he just now said. Frankly, that's mild compared to what is said about the president any given night on MSNBC. This is a network that has given a show to Al Sharpton. I don't have time to go over all the incendiary, hateful, anti-Semitic things this man has said over the years. Let's just do one of them. Because Dorian Johnson, the friend of Michael Brown, who lied and said he had his hands up and said don't shoot, has just been shot in Ferguson, not far from where his friend was shot. What does this have to do with Sharpton? Sharpton was in the streets of Ferguson yelling no justice, no peace before any investigation had taken place, and the investigation turns out that Michael Brown did not have his hands up, did not say don't shoot. His DNA was found on the officer's gun, and the officer was completely vindicated. Did Al Sharpton apologize? Did he lose his job for being in the streets of Ferguson, yelling no justice, no peace, and claims to be a disciple of MLK? MLK believed in civil disobedience. He was the very antithesis of no justice, no peace. But there is Al Sharpton every week calling Donald Trump a racist. He was involved in something called the Crown Heights riots, 1991, if I'm not mistaken. And one Jewish leader in New York called it the most serious pogrom in the history of America. He has a show on MSNBC. That's not a problem. Now, last night, Jimmy Kimmel and Steve Colbert said respectful things about Charlie Kirk. However, during the 2024 election, according to Media Research Center, roughly 98% of their jokes were directed towards only one candidate, and that candidate was Donald Trump. Why is this relevant? They're just comedians? Because around 20 or 25% of young people get their quote-unquote news from these monologues. So they are coarsening the debate just as these so-called newscasters are. There is a problem. And to act like it comes from both sides, Joe Biden gives a speech at a historically black college and says the number one threat to the homeland is white supremacy. Are you smoking something? Anti-Defamation League keeps track of how many people are killed every year by political extremists. Last year, I think it was 24 out of nearly 15,000, 20,000 homicides. Are you kidding me? So maybe, just maybe, the assassination of Charlie Kirk will cause MSNBC not just to think about somebody like Matthew Dowd, who is inconsequential, but about your entire lineup and the way you are referring to people with whom you disagree as fascists and Nazis and dictators and Hitlers and racists, which is a nightly occurrence.
For full shows, live and on demand, it's Salem News Channel.